Welcome to Coffee and Crumpets with Dr. Childress here this morning. Today, I'm going to be talking about the attachment system and a second brain relationship system called intersubjectivity. Now, these are near and dear to me because this is kind of my domain of practice. I was working early childhood, which is the attachment system and the intersubjective system. And I was out in foster care working with kids who were attachment pathology relative to extremely bad parents, child abusive parents. And so when I came over here, this attachment pathology in the family courts of a child rejecting a parent is not how the brain works in childhood. That's not an authentic attachment system. And I recognized that right away. Like the first session, 20 minutes into the first session, I'm recognizing this is not how the attachment system works in a child. But when I became more involved with this court-involved custody conflict, it became evident that the forensic psychologists are just ignorant like a rock. They have no understanding for what the attachment system is, how it works, how it functions, how it dysfunctions, and they're diagnosing and treating attachment pathology. It's like insane. They are immensely ignorant, immensely incompetent, and because of that, they are participating in the child abuse, the psychological abuse of the child, because they're misdiagnosing the pathology. So I began to intervene in the situation, and I've been doing that over the past 10 years to a certain extent, documenting the current state of affairs, but also educating people about what the pathology is. I started with the family systems constructs because those are the easiest to access, and it's a good description of the family. So it's a cross-generational coalition, creating an emotional cutoff in the child, Minuch and Bowen. So we should be applying family systems therapy and the constructs of family systems to family conflict, but they don't. They're not talking about cross-generational coalitions. They're not identifying the inverted hierarchy, where a child judges a parent as if the parent were the child and the child were the parent. That's called an inverted hierarchy. It comes from the empowerment of the child by the allied parent. And so they get empowered up in the hierarchy to where they can judge a parent as if the parent were the child. It's called an inverted hierarchy. It's out of family systems, and not a single forensic psychologist ever identifies it. They believe it. They believe the allegations of the persecutory delusion. And if you believe a persecutory delusion, a shared persecutory delusion, you become part of the shared persecutory delusion. You become part of the pathology. And when that pathology is child abuse, you become part of the child abuse. So all these ignorant and forensic psychologists, ignorant and incompetent forensic psychologists who believe the shared delusion are child abusers. They're participating in the child abuse because of their misdiagnosis as a result of their abject ignorance and incompetence. So that I started with sort of that description, and then also highlighted the personality pathology of the parent, narcissistic and borderline, and I'm bringing now the dark personalities onto that, and particularly around the Machiavellian manipulation of the dark personalities and the diagnosis of a factitious disorder imposed on another. A factitious disorder, Google factitious, artificially created. It's an artificially created attachment pathology. It's a false attachment pathology imposed on the child, imposed on another, for the secondary gain of there's multiple ones, but the primary one is manipulating the court's decisions on child custody by creating the child's false attachment pathology. And then also there's revenge motivations and things like that that can also be at play. For some borderlines, it's about maintaining a regulatory object. They need the child to maintain their self-regulation. But whatever the case is, whatever the secondary gain is, it's a dark Machiavellian manipulation by producing pathology in the child, false pathology in the child. And it's a false attachment pathology. So in foundations, I went through 3 levels. I went through family systems, I described it from that level. Then I went through the personality disorders, described it at that level. Then I wound up on the attachment system, because this is fundamentally an attachment pathology. Attachment system is the brain system that governs all aspects of love and bonding throughout the lifespan, including grief and loss. And a child rejecting a parent is an attachment pathology. So every mental health professional who works with this pathology should know and understand attachment system and attachment pathology and how to fix attachment pathology. It's called a breach and repair sequence. And Tronick has done a lot of work on it. So now I've reached this sort of the stage of development where I'm in the family courts reviewing mental health reports of these ignorant and incompetent forensic psychologists. I'm going to keep insulting them until they answer, because the moment they answer, they'll realize they are ignorant and incompetent. And so I've reached a point where I'm starting to encounter the ignorance directly and going through the levels of it. But it's time it's time to address some of the technical issues with the attachment system. This is a false attachment pathology. After writing foundations, and I came up with various instruments, various assessment instruments that will be helpful to scaffold the mental health professionals in doing the diagnosis, that I gave basically 3 diagnostic indicators for pathogenic parenting in this pathology. Now, the diagnosis can be made off of any one of those because they are all impossible symptoms. They never occur, and yet they occur in the family courts. But I realized that the level of ignorance is so great within the psychologists out there that I didn't want to give them just one symptom, because that would require they know stuff. So I gave them 3. And so all 3 of them are there. They'll feel more secure that the diagnosis is there. So it's attachment system suppression towards a normal range parent, a child rejecting a parent, never happens. Then we have the protest behavior. There's 2 versions. There's high anger, that's operationally defined as 5 narcissistic border personality symptoms that are being displayed by a child. Children do not have narcissistic personality disorder. In childhood, it's an attachment pathology. The narcissistic personality pathology develops as they move to adulthood. It's an adult disorder. So how does a child get an adult personality disorder? From influence by the narcissistic borderline dark personality parent. Or it can take a variant of high anxiety, operationally defined as the DSM criteria for a specific phobia, mother type or father type, and that never occurs. We've never had a case of a specific phobia, mother type or father type, except in the family courts. My goodness, I wonder why that is, that this unique phobia just develops within the family courts around child custody. The 3rd symptom, a persecutory delusion shown by the child. Children do not develop persecutory delusions towards a parent. They feel aggrieved by parenting sometimes, but they don't develop a persecutory delusion. And then you just look at the allied parent, they have the same delusion. It's a shared delusional disorder, shared persecutory delusion. So if all three of those symptoms are present, there's only one thing that's causing it, the allied parent and the influence of the allied parent. Then you do a parenting practices rating scale to just identify if the targeted parent has any problems, and you put the two of those together. Parenting practices rating scale on the targeted parent, see if they're normal range, level 3 or 4, and the diagnostic checklist of 3 symptoms relative to that. Now, the diagnostic checklist, interestingly, is actually based on Bowlby's 3 volumes. So volume 1 on attachment is diagnostic indicator 1, the attachment system suppression. Then book 2 on separation and protest, where it's anger or anxiety. The anger is the narcissistic symptom display. The anxiety is the phobic anxiety symptom display. So that's volume 2. And then volume 3 is the persecutory delusion, the thought disorder. And that's coming off of sadness and loss and the misattribution of feelings that occurs because the narcissistic borderline dark personality cannot process the emotion of sadness. It crashes their emotional psychological system. And so the grief and loss about the divorce crashes their emotional system, and they go off into anger and resentment, loaded with revengeful wishes, Otto Kernberg. So today, though, I'm going to be opening up more advanced knowledge regarding the attachment system, because children do not reject parents. That's not how the brain works. And let me explain why. The attachment system is a brain system. It's a primary motivational system of the brain. Like eating and sex, it's a primary motivational system of the brain. It is called a goal-corrected motivational system, meaning that it always maintains the goal of forming an attachment bond to the parent, always. It never seeks to detach from a parent, never, because it confers such substantial survival advantage to the child that there's predators out there who are more than happy to eat the child. When the predator comes into a group of humans, they're going to rush in and they're looking to scatter people, and they're going to try to get between the child and the parent. Because if they can separate the child from the protection of the parent, that child becomes dinner. Children are prey animals. And so over millions of years of evolution across species, started off with imprinting and then it's developed into attachment. It's across species. Baby zebra gets close to mommy zebra when the lion is present. That's the attachment system. It's a predator-driven system. It's an anxiety-based system. And so if the parent shows anxiety, the child goes, what? And gets close to the parent for protection. Now, with bad parents, okay, if I have a bad parent, that more fully exposes the child to the predators, because that's a bad parent. And so if the child has a good parent, the child feels safe and secure and goes exploring the world because they know the parent's watching them. But if that's a bad parent, the predator is going to eat the child. So the child emits protest behavior to get the parent's involvement, because as long as that parent's attending to the child, the predator is going to pass that child and go look for another one, because that parent's involved with the child. So that's the goal of protest behavior. High anger, high anxious, volume 2, John Bowlby. Protest behavior is designed to elicit greater involvement of the parent. Okay. The anger is not designed to reject a parent. The fear is not designed to reject. It is to elicit the involvement and protection of that parent. So the first thing when you come in and see a child's motivation is to detach from the parent, to reject a parent, That's not how the motivations of the attachment system work. They always seek to bond to a parent. In response to a bad parent, the attachment system changes how it tries to bond, but it always tries to bond. And it will change how it tries to bond in very specific ways. We've categorized one way as anxious ambivalent. That's your high protest child. That's what we have over here to a certain extent with the targeted parent. We've got a child emitting a high protest behavior, eliciting to get people's attention. Then the other variant is called an avoidant attachment. That's low protest. The high protest one, the ambivalent attachment, comes about from parents who are inconsistently available. Okay, so we know what type of parenting produces that type of attachment presentation because the attachment system is always trying to maintain the goal. So it changes how, and then we look at how it changed and know what it changed to. So we can identify the problematic parenting based on how the attachment system has corrected to it. So high protest is an inconsistently available parent. Treatment is to get that parent to be more consistent in their availability. The other one, a low protest child called an avoidant attachment, is in response to a parent who is emotionally overwhelmed. That's like the depressed parent. So if the child protests to that parent goes further away because they're overwhelmed. So the child learns to become low protest because that keeps the parent close, as close as possible. So both of those are strategies to keep the parent close because there's predators out to eat the child. The third type of attachment pathology is called disorganized attachment. That happens with abusive parents or with frightened or frightening parents. And so if in that zone, what about parents who are abusive of the child? Would that produce a rejection of the parent? Actually, no, that produces a disorganized attachment. The child has no organized strategies to bond to that parent. And there'll be flight from that parent because that's a dangerous parent, but there'll still be a motivation to bond to that parent because that's their parent, and that's the set goal of the attachment system. So the child never rejects the parent. Now, this becomes important on the treatment of attachment pathology. Because if I have attachment pathology between a parent and a child, they're not making that connection, then I can read the child's protest to understand what the problem is with the parent. And then once I fix the parent's parenting and help the parent become available to the child will bond right into that parent, because that's the way it works. And so fixing attachment pathology is actually relatively easy. If this is a targeted parent actually causing the child's attachment, it's really easy to fix. You fix the parent and the child will just bond right back in because it's a set goal, and they always want to bond. Except with the cross-generational coalition and the shared persecutory delusion. If now we have a child who wants to reject a parent, wants to escape a parent, does not have a motivation to bond to a parent, that's not an authentic attachment system. That's being influenced by an outside source, and it's the allied parent, and they're creating a persecutory delusion in the child for secondary gain of manipulating the court's decisions about child custody. Now, creating a delusion in the child, the narcissistic borderline dark personality parent convinces the child that they are a victim of malevolent treatment by the allied parent. That's what needs to happen to create the pathology. So in the chaos of the divorce and all the sadness and grief and all the emotions of a divorce, the allied parent, the pathological parent, manipulates the child into believing that they are being victimized somehow by the targeted parent. And they have now defined the other parent as a predator threat to the child. So now they have nullified the other parent as a protective parent and identified them as the threat or danger. So that's how they get the suppression on the normal attachment motivations for the child, by a false description of that parent as the predator, danger, or threat. Now, they're in the family courts, and there is authentic child abuse, and that is of concern to the healthy parent when the other parent is a danger to the child. So in the family courts, if there's custody conflict or there's concern about either parent being abusive of the child, then we need a proper risk assessment for possible child abuse to the differential diagnosis of which parent. Either the targeted parent is abusing the child, in which case we need to diagnose it, put it on a treatment plan, fix it, and restore the child's healthy bond to the now fixed parent, or it's a shared persecutory delusion created by a pathological, narcissistic, borderline, dark personality parent for secondary gain of manipulating the court and getting revenge against the other spouse. It's also spousal abuse diagnosis. So we got one of two possibilities here. When we got child custody issues with a child rejecting a parent, diagnostic indicator 1, we have a differential diagnosis of child abuse. The question is which parent. So for the targeted parent, just get the clinician to rate that parent's parenting based on examples, based on the clinical interviews, and get all the information and rate that parent on treatment. We got abusive range parenting with the targeted parent. I'm not as worried about, at this point, what's happening with the allied parent if I've got a clearly abusive parent. Now, if they're level 3, which is like normal range problematic, we're not perfect, but it's normal range. It's just normal range parenting. And or level 4, which is healthy parenting, either a little bit on the structured side, a little bit on the permissive side, or balanced in the middle with that. But it's normal range healthy parenting, level 4. If it's level 3 or 4, then that's not the type of parenting that produces a child rejecting a parent, that would produce an insecure attachment, which more strongly motivates the child to bond to the parent. And just as an example, you look at the family court pathology with the shared delusional disorder and what people call parental alienation and stuff. If you look at it, who is the child remaining close to? The allied parent. That's the insecure attachment. Who is the child venturing away from? The targeted parent. That's the secure attachment. The child feels secure enough in their attachment to the targeted parent that they can do all sorts of mean and cruel and they know that parent's not going to leave them. But this other parent, the allied parent, they have to meet that parent's needs or that parent's out of here. And so that's the insecure attachment, is the one that the child stays close to for protection. The secure attachment is the one the child goes away from and explores the world with. So the attachment system over here is just really a nightmare to try to define, because it's not a true attachment pathology. It's not being caused by the actual behavior of the targeted rejected parent. So that's diagnostic indicator 1. Attachment system suppression towards a normal range parent. So if you have that symptom, there is only one possible cause for it, because children do not reject a normal range parent. They don't reject abusive parents, but they certainly don't reject a normal range parent. So let's collect that information. There's allegations that the targeted parent is abusing the child somehow. The child believes they are being malevolently treated in some way by the targeted parent, or that the targeted parent has a wish to do evil to the child. There's concerns about abuse, potentially abusive rage, parenting with the targeted parent. So let's get that assessed. Let's get it documented on the parenting practices rating scale. If it's not abusive rage, if it's level 3 or 4, if it's just normal range parenting, then we likely have a persecutory delusion. Here is the definition of a persecutory delusion from the American Psychiatric Association. Persecutory type: delusions that the person or someone to whom the person is close is being malevolently treated in some way. Google malevolent, having or showing a wish to do evil to others. So does the child and the allied parent have a fixed and false belief that the child is being malevolently treated in some way, that the other targeted parent has a wish to do evil to the child? If that's true, then that's a delusional thought disorder. That's a persecutory delusion. It's, that's a targeted parent is a normal range parent. And the way we assess for delusions, we don't do it based on history. It's called a mental status exam of thought and perception. It's a very specific type of clinical assessment where I'll sit with a client or sit with a person, and I'll begin to go through their thinking systems, their frontal lobe executive function systems for linear logical reasoning, because it's a thought disorder. It's not linear and logical. A thought disorder, a delusion, starts with the conclusion as fixed and then constructs the evidence or the evidence to match the fixed conclusion. Whereas the rest of us, normal range people, we follow the evidence to reach our conclusion. The thought disorder doesn't work that way. It works in the reverse. It starts with the conclusion as fixed and then constructs the evidence. And so what a mental status exam does, of thought and perception does, there's different mental status exams. There's one for memory, there's one for emotions, for different things. But this one for thought and perception, it's the frontal lobe executive function systems for linear logical reasoning. And what we do is we stay on a linear logical path. We grab an issue and we just start moving it down this path of linear logical reasoning. And what we will find is when it reaches the unresolved trauma point that's causing the delusion, when we reach the thought disorder point, it will no longer remain linear. It will go boop and pop into what we call associational thinking. That's emotional thinking. So you'll be going down a linear path and all of a sudden it'll take a side route. Then you bring it back to the linear path and it'll take another side route. It's like trying to put two magnets, the positives of two magnets together, and you can never do it because that's what it's like trying to get a thought disorder to remain on a linear path, because it can't handle the truth. To quote, Jack Nicholson, you can't handle the truth. And so you can't bring them back to a linear line. They will keep, and they'll get more and more animated and stressed by the situation. Now, with a delusion, what we're doing is we're actually popping it out in the session, that we're going to take a look at it right there, and you can assess it. You can assess its frequency, its quality, what its focus is. Typically, with delusional disorders, the person with the delusion is not aware that I'm even popping their delusion out because they're delusional. They believe it. And so a nice, gentle little mental status exam can expose a delusion and give me a sense of its scope and range. And there's different types. There's erotomanic delusions. Those are your stalker people who are stalking your movie stars. That's an erotomanic delusion. If only I met them, they would love me. There's jealousy delusions, where the spouse believes the other spouse is having an affair and it's not true. A lot of times those are involved in spousal abuse kinds of situations. We might have a jealousy delusion. There's bizarre delusions of schizophrenics. And so there's a variety of different types of delusions, grandiose delusions, those sorts of things. This particular type is called a persecutory delusion. It's a fixed and false belief in supposed victimization. And this one is coming from unresolved trauma. So this is not a psychotic origin delusion. This is a trauma origin delusion. The person had childhood experiences that kind of twisted up how they see the world a little bit. So they're sensitive to threat and perception, to threat and danger. And so they see threat where none exists. That's the persecutory belief system, that they believe they're being malevolently treated some way by the world, when that's not true. And so it's a trauma origin, unresolved trauma, that distorts their thinking and perception. So the assessment for that is a mental status exam of thought and perception. Now, no one over here in the family courts knows about mental status.